Here we are today. I'm going to talk about some of the issues that you will run into when you're refinishing a string through guitar. Oftentimes, people don't want to attempt or are afraid to attempt the extraction of the string ferrules on these guitars. And it's really a problematic issue on a lot of these guitars that are using polyester finishes all the way from sealer to the top coating. On this particular one, that is the case. It is a white Flying V. And the reason I can tell it's polyester is because of the yellow tint that basically varies in shade from, you can tell where in the process of wet sanding, they remove more material than other places, thus changing the color of this. And it makes it relatively difficult, or let's say impossible, to do a spot repair on it when you have a white guitar with a polyester finish, because the white is so many different values. But in this particular guitar I have here today, I wanted to kind of show you guys what I was talking about, referring to the ferrules. You need to have a couple different size punches, or I oftentimes use older drill bits that are indexed to the size to pass through the holes in the string ferrules. Some of the problems, I'm going to flip around and show you guys. These things, when they're inserted, you can see fractures right here. Oftentimes, they try to put a relief cut, like you can see a beveling right around this here, to try to alleviate the pressure that's caused by the insertion of these things straight from the factory. This is a very rigid material. It is not forgiving in these regards. Any sort of pressure, you can see like this one had a fracture all the way back right here. So when I popped this out from the back side, or from the other side, you will actually see that it had removed a considerable amount of all the way down to the wood, the sealer, all the way down to the maple neck through insert here. And again here, there's a fracture that came up off of this edge here, and there's another one just barely see right here along that edge. So this stuff all has to come out. All this material will have to be removed, and this will all have to be resealed with polyester and then leveled back in. A good portion of this material will be sanded down. Now, I don't have a problem using the factory sealer coat. It's nice and stable. If there are no fractures, then I will, use those areas. But if there are fractures in any of this material, like such, like right in here, you have to get rid of those fractures. You just can't paint over these things. That fracture is going to keep going. You'll see that fracture immediately when you start putting paint over top of it. And sometimes they're so small and so difficult to see that you sometimes don't see them until you get the material on top of it. Now, there's a couple options. You can go about with a very thin water-thin super glue, and you can actually go in and allow that to impregnate that crack, but it's still not the best way to do it. It's a good way to secure it to a certain extent, but I can't promise you that it's not going to come back. It depends on how much moisture it's taken in underneath that fracture. There's a lot of variables that one can't truly say, yeah, this is going to be okay or not. So I won't advise you, but if you do have a guitar that has these kind of fractures and you're trying to keep them from creeping out anymore, water-thin glue will be fine, but you'll, of course, have to sand that down and do some buffing in the areas that you do apply that super glue. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to flip this guitar over. Hopefully you guys can see this, because I'm just going to be doing this one-handed while I'm holding this damn thing here. But you basically just take your drill bit on the square edge, and you're going to find that shelf. You can hear it hitting the edge of that right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the phone right over here on my other hand, and I'm going to try to get you guys so you can see how I'm addressing that. And it takes a few taps. You want to work your way around. And there's not much there. That's why you have to use the square shoulder of that. And I can't do this with my hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do it this way, see if that works for you guys. While I try to extract this. And I'm sure we're going to have a significant amount of damage on this one because it was right where that fracture was. Now the easy part is getting these front ones out. You just come through the backside and take this hole here, this drill bit, pop it up through the backside here, and you come up and you push these ones out of the way. Those little smaller ferrules are usually on the front of the guitar. They're not a problem. So you can see how much damage this has caused already as a result of these miniature fractures that were in here. We're dealing with this polyester too. This is a very rigid, non-forgiving substrate. If you've gotten it this far, and you already know you're going to have to do so much repair on this, the next step is you want to take a little pair of pliers here that I have. They're actually cutters, and I use these for fret cutting, but these ones have been used. You can see the edge is damaged. So I use this one for extraction. I'm going to come in here, I'm just going to rock it just a little bit. Now, if I was trying to preserve or prevent any damage on the finish at this point, I would have put something underneath these pliers while I'm doing this. And you can see this is just take it easy. Don't try to do it all at once. You know, there's just no easy way to do it. And I know why most guys send them to me with them in, but you can see all these little fractures that were in there. They've now opened up. The material is now going away. This guitar has been painted twice. This guitar has 2 paint jobs on it, so that means it has gone through the process from top to bottom twice. And how do I know? Well, I can pretty much forensically examine the paint chips, and you can see the reapplication of the white and the clear in the layers. So this is what you deal with when you're working with string through guitars. You know, the older the guitar is, the worse it's going to be. So I just wanted to kind of help you guys out with some of this stuff and see what some of us painters and the guys who refinish and repair guitars have to deal with in regards to string through. Hope you guys have a good day. So in my previous effort to record by myself here, I basically kind of chronicled my efforts to remove the string ferrules on this guitar. Front side went relatively easy. The back side had quite a bit of damage as a result of. And I'm going to talk about white guitars right now and why there is so much damage here in these areas. I don't know if you can really see it or not, but it's pretty obvious from the damage and the forensic research here that I'm doing on this instrument as I take it apart that this guitar had been painted twice at the factory. White guitars are not easy to paint, especially when you're dealing with the polyesters. You can see how the color changes right through here. Where this was barely sanded here along the edge of this, see how dark and kind of like almond looking it is compared to the flat up here, and then compared to where it delaminated, where the white was actually exposed right here, where the polyester sheared from that. So the factory, Jackson factory, they had to paint this guitar twice. It's not uncommon. I see a lot of silver. I see a lot of white guitars having to be sprayed twice in an effort to make them as flawlessly as possible. But I'm going to tell you this, that anybody who's painting a guitar white is going to be beating themselves against a brick wall by the time they're done doing it. Even as this thing having been sprayed twice, there's contaminants. You can see them here that are actually locked down into it. So what they may have done, you might have had a contaminant here the first time around. You're thinking, oh hell, or quality control rejects it. And usually in factories and companies like this, the people in quality control oftentimes never picked up a single bit of paint gun in their life. I dealt with that in the motorcycle industry for years. They don't understand that we're spraying a liquid substrate onto a surface that is going to trap things. I mean, minuscule microns. Now, the problem of these the little dots that you see, these contaminations, is once the solvents and the clears hit them, sometimes it expands them, they swell, so they get even bigger. So you may feel like, oh crap, I gotta repaint this whole guitar because I got this one spot, but I guarantee you, you might have got that spot covered up, but you're gonna come over here, you're gonna see another spot. You're gonna have these spots that Jackson actually had to leave in this instrument because they came to their senses, I think, after the second time painting it. You know what? We're never gonna get this completely spot free. Now, you don't notice these things, and this is the reason why I don't paint guitars for people that are simply solid colors, because you just can't make them perfect. And you know, if someone's going to sit there and haggle me over one little speck of dirt in a paint job, I'm going to lose my mind. I don't want to deal with it. So personally, I don't do solid finishes anymore because of this type of stuff that I see. Now, a lot of the damage that you do see here around these string ferrules is because there was too much material on this guitar. There is no need for this much material on a guitar. Now, polyester is a very thick substrate. And, you know, God bless these guys. They were just trying to make a perfectly white guitar. Now, a lot of reasons that this could have failed any sort of quality control dealing with polyester over white. But, I mean, whoever it was, they were wearing a blue t-shirt that day, and you can see all sorts of remnants of cloth fiber in this particular paint job. And I do know this is a factory paint job. Some people may say, well, Mike, how do you know this isn't somebody repainted it? Well, I'm going to tell you, I know exactly why, because I'm looking at the levels of paint. I'm looking at the areas where it's torn down. I'm looking at the almost like the striations on the side of a cliff. Looking at the different rock variations. I'm doing the same thing here as I look at this, but if this guitar had not had so much material on, I probably wouldn't have had these issues right here. Now, even if you are using polyester as a substrate for your sealing, you don't have to leave you know, 1/8 of an inch of material on your guitar. You can sand it back and get it relatively flat. Oftentimes, the best way to do it is to sand it flat and then hit it again with a thinner coat on top of that, and then sand that back, because sometimes you might sand through in efforts of trying to, you know, fill in the grain on some guitars, and particularly some end grain on like mahogany, swamp ash, and so forth. But just because you put a lot of material on the guitar doesn't mean it has to stay on there. You can sand it off. Resonance can be encumbered with a certain amount of material. It'll start to dampen the natural resonance of the body. So you want to kind of keep that in mind. Some people will say lacquer is the way to go, and because of the fact that it is a relatively thin material, I will argue against that all day long, because it's just a marketing hyperbole in the industry anymore these days. Lacquer. Oh, that's the way they did it in the 50s. This is the way they must be done now. Well, there's a reason why they don't do lacquer anymore. One, it's very difficult to get a hold of. Two, materials today, the modern paint finishes are far more superior than lacquer. If you are going to do lacquer finish, just put a polyester finish down and put your lacquer on top of it, so when everybody opens up their guitar case, it smells nice and fresh like lacquer. That'll make everybody happy. So anyways, I just wanted to kind of share this with you guys. Some of the damages and some of the issues dealing with polyester, thickness of paint, and trying to remove items from the guitar without damaging it. So I hope this kind of enlightens some people who want to get into painting guitars. Hopefully it enlightens customers who want to send guitars off to get painted. And hopefully it thoroughly explains why I don't do solid finishes on guitars anymore. All right. So another issue here on this particular guitar, due to the fact that it's I don't know, probably mid-90s guitar. I haven't looked at the numbers, but just by looking at the age of the material. But you can see the whole length along the binding here. It's separated, split. Now, something that you need to know about polyester. A lot of guys who own Jacksons with the 6 inline tuners with their standard pointy headstock, you'll see on the ones that have, like, say, the mother of pearl logos on there, oftentimes they'll be separating the material at the edge here on, in particular, the dinkies, where the headstock has the wood on the side and the neck's not painted, but the face of it is. Now, what happens is the polyester, it's a very rigid substrate. It's much like fiberglass resin in a lot of ways. It will basically take on its own form, and it will contract and it will expand at different rates than the other materials on the guitar. Wood, base coats, especially if you have like a candy paint job over top of silver, then you got another substrate to add in there. If it's a pearl added on top of that, you got another substrate on top of that. Binding is a completely different element and has a different contracting rate due to weather changes in humidity as well as temperature. So what happens over a period of time on these instruments is that they've had the time to expand, contract, expand, contract, expand, contract, all at different rates during different times of the year. And it will find that weakest spot. And in this particular case, one of the instances of it is along the length of the fingerboard. Now, a lot of people would, like I mentioned in earlier videos, just sand it down and paint over it. Well, it's going to come back on you. You can take a little bit of water-thin super glue and try to impregnate that crack, but I always find it best just to sand it all out. Anytime you see a crack, sand it out. So I just wanted to talk about the materials, contraction rate, and why these little instances of damages take place. So hope that helps anybody out there trying to get into this aspect of the business with their artwork. If you're a great artist, it's great to have that as a tool, but there's so much more involved painting guitars that there will be a learning curve. Don't just take it to your local body shop because they're used to painting steel fenders. So there's a whole nother series of videos we'll be doing along the way talking about those differences, dealing with painting guitars specifically.